Hello everyone, Martin Lush here from NSF Health Sciences. A very warm welcome to you all on behalf of the NSF team to our penultimate, doesn't the year go quickly, our penultimate webinar, Resiliency, Taking the Hits and Bouncing Back. So here we are, 21st of November, second to last webinar. And I was just saying to many of you earlier, I actually, in pulling this webinar together, reflecting on what we've covered collectively in the past and the state of the world as it stands at the moment, I actually think this is the most important webinar out of all of them. So hopefully that's whetted your appetite. And also, right at the end of this webinar, I'm going to share with you our 2017 free webinar program. This is right at the end. For those of you who contributed to that program, giving your ideas and thoughts, we really appreciate that, and you'll be getting preferential treatment in being able to book in on these webinars earlier than anybody else. So really exciting webinar program for you next year, many of which are built on the ideas and suggestions many of you put forward. So the usual format, really short and sharp, recorded. You can access these later on. I really recommend you share this one. If you haven't shared any of the others, this one is really key for you to share with the rest of your colleagues. Any questions, please let me know. I'll get back to you. We always welcome feedback. That's the only way we improve these webinars. Any recommendations for improvement. And again, a reminder to follow me on LinkedIn for additional free resources. So, you know, these LinkedIn posts that I write, knowing how busy you guys are, they're really easy to digest even from your iPhone, your mobile device, maybe 3 to 4 minutes tops, whether they're on blame culture, human error. The latest one on paralyzed by complexity has attracted over 1,000 readers in just under 2 weeks. The key thing is with all of my all of my LinkedIn posts, I try to really make them as useful as possible, easy to digest, and at the same time provocative. So that's just a reminder of some of the titles. You all know, or most of you know me, I'm Martin Lush, I'm President of the Pharma Biotech Division of NSF Health Sciences. I've been in the industry for a good number of years, longer than 35 years, so I guess I consider myself experienced and streetwise, not expert in any way, just experienced. And as with all of my colleagues at NSF, we do our best to help our clients prepare for the future, not for a world that no longer exists. So, we tend to pride ourselves in being forward-thinking, anticipating what is around the corner, and yet we get surprised and to some extent shocked as well. Bottom line is, a lot of what we're going to talk about, namely brutal disruption, the things that we didn't expect, creates a world that is very, very different and a world that requires a very different approach. Now, I suppose any of these quotes are a surprise to you. I've certainly heard them many, many times. Proper planning prevents poor performance, fail to plan, plan to fail. And all of that is good. All of that is true. But in theory, that means that you've taken all of these challenges, and I'm not going to go through them all, ladies and gentlemen, but there's some weighty ones there, from global warming, urbanization, globalization, political, social instability, down to impact of millennials, war on talent, the list goes on and on and on. So taking those quotes to their logical conclusion, what that really means is that you're going to be really well prepared, have everything in place for all of these kind of challenges. And none of these are what I call the brutal challenges. All of these are predictable. All of these, in my opinion, will happen. But the reality is that very few of us have the time, the resources to deal with these. And if I'm perfectly honest, very few people have the motivation, because it's far easier to deny everything, keep calm and carry on. That notion of, look, this isn't going to affect us, we'll be fine. That's a natural human response, and that's okay. But the reality is there are around the corner what I call brutal disruptions, and these are even bigger than the ones that I've just described. They're massive. They're really, really painful. You didn't necessarily see them coming. And the reality is life will never, ever be the same afterwards. But, the truth is that these only used to occur sort of once every, 10 years, every decade. Well, now they're going to occur once every year, once every 6 months. So get used to them. And the whole purpose of this session, ladies and gentlemen, is to help us, is to help you as individuals as well as organizations to be resilient. We can't plan for every eventuality, but there are certain things that we can do to allow us to bounce back stronger when we do get that brutal surprise. Not necessarily a great fan of Lenin, but he did have this really neat quote. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And, I'll pause here for a moment of reflection because, if you looked at where the world was at the beginning of the year and where we sit now, there's been some surprises there. Now, I'm not saying these are necessarily good or bad because only history will tell us. But the point I'm making is that these are the types of brutal disruptions, in other words, painful, you didn't see them coming, and life-changing. Anybody that believes the world is going to be the same place with the same types of issues and challenges post these two events, then frankly I think you're deluding yourselves. So how do we manage and be prepared for these? Now, the well-renowned management guru of all gurus, Mike Tyson, had a really nice quote that I love to use. Having a plan is great until someone punches you in the face and breaks your nose. In other words, you didn't see it coming. It's extremely painful. One minute you're standing there and the next minute you're flat down on your face on the canvas with blood everywhere. And resiliency, which is what we're here to talk about the next 30 minutes, is about how do we ensure that we actually bounce back, not just to get hit again, but we actually bounce back stronger than we did in the first instance. I'm a great fan of the Stockdale paradox. So for those of you that don't know this, James Stockdale was a admiral, I think rear vice admiral in the American Air Force, most senior part of the military to be captured during the Vietnam War. So he was incarcerated in the notorious Hanoi Hilton for 7 years, and he survived. And when he was asked about who survived and who died, his famous quote was that those that died were the optimists. In other words, those that believed that they would be released in 6 months' time or 6 weeks' time. In other words, they failed to confront the brutal reality. So the Stockdale paradox is really, really key in this world of change that we all face and experience. First and foremost, it's saying, look, retain faith that you will prevail in the end regardless of the difficulties. At the same time, recognizing the brutal facts of where you are. Now, I'm an optimist, and despite all of these challenges that we as individuals and as societies as well as businesses face, I'm pretty optimistic that providing we confront the brutal facts, in other words, let's not pretend it's going to be the same, confront those facts and then retain faith that we will prevail by taking some simple steps. Now, Darwin, you can see this is a webinar of quotes because really quotes take us to the core of the subject matter. Another one of Darwin's quotes, it's not the strongest species that survives nor the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. So it's our ability as individuals and our abilities as businesses to really adapt to a world that is now very, very different. Now, in preparing for this session, there are lots and lots of things I could have put down, but it's forced me to really think about what I consider to be the most important. So, helping you to bounce back stronger, here are your 6 to fix. Starting with, what does the bounce back culture look like? In other words, the culture in your labs, in your production facilities, in your businesses. We'll talk about the importance of brutal simplification, because we want to respond quickly. We can not do that without simplifying. Complexity slows things down. I've done a post recently on complexity, and with over 1,000 readers in the first 2 weeks, clearly this is a major concern for the industry. The power of the network. We'll talk about the fact that you cannot do this alone. The stronger your network, internally as well as externally, the greater your ability to bounce back. Number 4, we'll move on to communication and the importance of really, really fast feedback loops. We'll then explore what basics you need to do to PhD level, and building on the last webinar, really what individually we need to do to be ready for a world of brutal disruption. Okay, number 1, the bounce back culture. Now, the bounce back culture for me is symbolized by these. Number 1, really, really high levels of trust throughout your network, throughout your organization. For those of you not familiar with rugby, that picture top left is a scrum. Now, in a rugby scrum, you have lots of really big, powerful guys pushing together in order to get possession of the ball. Now, for that to work and for injuries to be prevented, there has to be a very, very, very high level of trust in the people around you. If one person doesn't do their job correctly, people get badly injured. So that's what I mean by really high levels of trust. And also, a bounce back culture is one in which there is total and absolute transparency from top to bottom. Total and absolute transparency, and a culture where there is totally no blame. And one in which, and I've mentioned this on a number of occasions, where black box thinking is really, really practiced. And as we've discussed before, and I've written posts on this as well, this is about redefining success. This is about embracing failure. This is about learning from mistakes. In other words, adopting black box thinking. So a bounce back culture is one where there are really, really high levels of trust, where blame does not exist, really high levels of transparency across the organization, and finally an organization that thinks differently about failure. An organization that actually considers failure to be the catalyst for continuous improvement, where failure is a free lesson in what does not work. Because in a climate that is changing brutally, as in the way that we've described, you're going to make mistakes, and the ability to respond is really going to be key. And that means considering mistakes to be not bad, but actually great learning experiences. Ford reputably said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So we know that errors are going to happen because we can't plan and predict for the types of challenges that we've described. So let's learn from those failures rather than punish people, rather than hide them, rather than making them sound better than they really are. So on number 1, the bounce back culture, my question to you is this: how do you compare? Do your measures drive the right behaviors? Are you focused on reducing deviations, incidents and problems and mistakes? Because if you are, you probably have a blame culture. Are most of your deviations attributed to human error? Because if they are, you probably have a blame culture. Unintentionally so, but nevertheless a blame culture. Do you have high levels of repeat deviations? Well, if you do, that means you're not practicing black box thinking, and that's something that has to be fixed. Do you have lots of face-to-face communications? Because in the absence of these, miscommunication happens, rumors creep in, and you end up having a blame culture. And importantly, do you have really highly visible and available leadership? So ask yourself those questions. Also, do you embrace adhocracy? In other words, bureaucracies are kept to an absolute minimum. You encourage informal team roles. You encourage people's ability to improvise. You have rapid cycles that allow you to turn things around very, very quickly. You decentralize so that you can make decisions faster and more locally. You empower people to make those decisions and to drive improvement rather than having to wait for decisions by middle or senior management. So that is what we mean by a bounce back culture. So the question for you all is, do you have one? Let's move on to number 2. In order to be resilient, we need to be nimble. We need to be fast. And in order to be fast and nimble, we have to brutally simplify. Because whenever we have complexity, it slows things down. Now, I'd really encourage you, if you haven't done, to read my LinkedIn post recently on, are you paralyzed by complexity? Simple solutions. So that actually gives you more on what to do. But to be resilient, we have to simplify as best we can. So my question to you again is, how do you compare? Have you brutally simplified? Do you have systems that are fit for purpose in that they are simple? So your SOPs, those standard operating procedures that are there to drive consistency of the operation, do you have more words than pictures? If you don't, you have an overcomplicated SOP. Do your SOPs run for longer than 3 to 4 pages of solid text? If they do run to longer, then you have overcomplexity. Does your change control system approve everything? If it does, you're probably adding a huge amount of complexity that is going to slow you down. Do you focus on firefighting, the quick fix, rather than prevention? And lastly, are you suffering from risk aversion? Because fear of failure often drives complexity because it gives a false sense of security. Paradoxically, the more fearful we are of risk, the more risk averse we are, the greater the risk because of those levels of complexity that are added as a result. So number 2 was about brutal simplification. So not only do we need a culture that allows us to bounce back, that's a culture of high trust, high transparency, blame-free, and one that ensures we learn from mistakes, black box thinking. Number 2, brutal simplification. And now we move on to number 3, the importance of really, really strong networks and relationships. I was privileged to present at a conference last week in London where a lot of people from ABPI, the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry, the regulators were there, key players from all parts of from hospitals through to healthcare providers, the research associations and patient groups and so on. And the key theme for the conference was, how do we ensure that the smart medicines of the future are generated for a population in desperate need? And the buzzword that came out consistently was collaboration. In other words, the recognition that no company can do this alone. That Big Pharma has to collaborate with small biotechs. We have to collaborate with academic institutes. We have to collaborate with third parties. We have to collaborate with the regulators. We have to collaborate with patient groups. No one group can do it alone. So in this world of continuous change, when those brutal disruptions are just around the corner, the power of the network is going to be really, really, really key to us all. In short, we can't survive alone. And importantly, it's recognizing that the skills and knowledge that we need to react quickly are actually there in your network, whether it be colleagues, whether it be the workforce, whether it be industry, the regulators, patient groups. The list is endless. Just pause for a little on the capabilities of your workforce. I truly believe that most workforces in our industry are underutilized. We have massive intellectual capacity and capability in the people filling syringes or putting tablets into blister packs. We just don't use it. So the question to you is really how powerful and well connected is your network. And remember, please, that networking is transactional. It's really, really personal. It's an overused term, in my opinion, because networking, a good networking, is about relationships where there are high levels of trust and respect, and where the law of reciprocity is practiced each and every day. In other words, that give and thou shall receive. In order to have a really good network with a network that will help you, a network that will, in times of change, when somebody does punch you in the face and you go down on the canvas, blood everywhere, this is the network that will actually assist because of those relationships and that reciprocity. There are two types of people in this world that we all live in, givers and takers, and we all know the difference between the two. The givers have a really strong and loyal network that give back because you have given to them, you have helped them, you have supported them without the expectation of getting anything back, but you do eventually. And there are those that are takers, the type, they're constantly taking from you and give you nothing in return. So really the power of the network is really, really key. So my question to you for number 3 is, do you have a network of contacts within your business, within the industry, within your patient groups that will come to your assistance when you do get punched in the face, when that next brutal disruption comes around the corner? Do you have people that at the touch of a button on your computer or on LinkedIn or on a phone call, people will drop everything and come and help you? Or do you live in an environment of silos, where labs are competing against labs, sites are competing against sites, departments give information on a need-to-know basis? Because organizations that are siloed in this way are going to really, really struggle because those networks, in the way that we described, are not strong enough. So strong networks are really, really key. And one question I'd also put to you all is, do you really love your third parties? And I mean, do you really love them? As an industry, we rely very heavily on third parties, suppliers of raw materials, suppliers of packaging components, contract manufacturing organizations, contract research organizations. We can't, as an industry, survive without them. So do you love them? Do you have a win-win or a win-lose relationship with them? Often when scientists talk to scientists, or when manufacturing people talk to manufacturing people in these third parties, that relationship is very, very good. It's very healthy. It's a relationship based on mutual trust and respect because we're talking to people who think the same as we do. in my experience, that relationship then grinds to a halt when our colleagues from legal department, when our colleagues from procurement department then land that third party with a legal document that basically concludes, once you've deciphered it, you win, they win, you lose. Now, it's really, really important that these third parties, who are such a vital part of our network, are really loved rather than treated often in the way that they, where they feel that they are the losers in that relationship. So networking is really, really key. Make sure, please, that you have a network that you have that you put effort into growing, effort into supporting, where reciprocity is really practiced day in and day out. And that then provides you with the help you will need when that next brutal disruption comes round the corner. Number 4, do you have fast feedback loops? Now, I've demonstrated this. If you can imagine putting your hand over a hot stove, you very, very quickly realize when it's getting too hot and your hand comes back in seconds. So the ability to respond is very, very quick, and that is the speed of response that we in this ever-changing world are going to actually require, because speed and accuracy will be everything. So the ability to take accurate data, and the emphasis there is on accurate data, and then interpret that data really, really quickly, to communicate and share that data really, really quickly, to enable us to make a fast, and because of the accuracy of the data, accurate decision is going to be really, really key. So my question to you all is, do you have really fast but effective feedback loops? How do you compare? How quickly are decisions made within your organizations? Do you have and encourage high levels of accountability? No decision-making by committee? I hope not, because decision-making by committee is rarely effective and it is always slow. Do you have excellence in risk-based decision-making, a subject that we've covered on previous webinars, yes or no? Do you share knowledge effectively across your entire organization, so that when good and bad things happen in another facility in another part of the world, you know about it instantly? Do you have easy use and easy access to a really good risk register? So this is really all about our ability to respond very, very quickly. In Google have over 320 teams working on artificial intelligence. Big investment in time, big teams, each have their own budgets, each have their own outcomes, and to launch that big initiative took only 2 yeses, one of which was Larry Page himself. So do you have that same level of decision making, really fast, really effective, based upon really, really accurate data? So fast feedback loops, really, really key. Number 5, companies that are resilient will do the basics to PhD level, and they will do these habitually. In other words, they will do these, practice these on a day-to-day basis without even thinking. These are my 6. Number 1, organizational expertise in products and processes. Everybody throughout the organization understands the product, how it's absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted, the critical control points of the process, the key quality attributes of the product. Because without that foundation knowledge, you can't do anything else. Number 2, do you have excellence in problem solving? Do you have excellence, number 3, in risk management and risk-based decision making? Is your change management system fast and effective. And a good change management system can review and approve a change in under 30 minutes. That's a fast feedback loop. A good change management system rejects 40 to 50% of the changes put forward to it. Does your system do the same? Are you obsessed with simplification? Because we all need to be. And finally, do you invest in education rather than training? And as we've described, in the past, there is a big difference between the two. We educate our children, we train our pets. In other words, do you educate your people to ensure they understand the why that underpins the how? So in this world of brutal disruption, we need to have these core skills embedded throughout our organizations to enable people to respond accordingly. I think leadership is worth a quick mention because when faced with brutal disruption, people follow leaders with high levels of emotional intelligence, not necessarily high IQ. They will follow leaders who are translational rather than transactional. In other words, they will follow people who care about themselves, care about people rather than about themselves, and leaders who engender very, very high levels of trust. Now, this is a subject that we're going to go into next year when we talk about Leadership 2030 in our webinar program. And number 6, in this world of brutal change, it's really, really key we each look after ourselves because these brutal surprises are going to be painful, and there are going to be times when each one of us will be pushed to our limits. And in the last webinar we talked about survival skills, so just revisit that webinar to remind ourselves that we are all remarkable. We have remarkable bodies, remarkable minds. We just need to look after them all. And if we do that through making the right personal choices, whether it be of diet, exercise, sleep and relaxation, we can respond, we can be more resilient as and when the time is required. Because as we all know, we're not machines. And that resilient mindset is really, really key. Embracing the Stockdale paradox, managing your chimp, remember that from a previous webinar, the ability to control our emotions, focus on the facts, and make the right decisions. Becoming a black box thinker, that is re-engineering our attitude to failure from it being a painful consequence of mistakes to a learning opportunity. Having really, really strong and supportive networks, and that's what we're here for. We have ourselves very strong networks, and we see ourselves as NSF in providing you with the support you're going to need in the times that are ahead. And really, recognizing that there is no gain without pain. You can actually make yourself more resilient by practicing much and habituating much of what we've covered. Now, it's really, really easy when you talk about brutal disruption to sort of put your head in the sand or head in your hands and say, my God, is this going to be really, really tough? Well, it is going to be really, really tough. But, I'm an optimist, and I really believe that disruption is good because what it does do is really sort of opens up the box to new thinking and new possibilities. And it's only in times of real challenge do we get those light bulb moments. So, just think about the types of brutal disruption that we're all experiencing at the moment, whether it be President-elect Trump, whether it be Brexit. Who knows where either of those will take us? What can be guaranteed is the world is a very, very different place. And our ability to cope with that and manage that and seek out the opportunities that those brutal disruptions present is going to be really, really key. So your call to action in bringing this to a close is please, please think and reflect on this. How did you compare in each of those 6 to fix? What must you do differently? What action steps are you going to take? Now, it's really, really easy with these webinars ladies and gentlemen, to go, yeah, that was nice, I've had my lunch, and now I'm going to go out the door and get on with my day-to-day routine. Now, that routine is will not be the same next year as it will be this year. So your job, your challenge is to destabilize the status quo, not accept it. It's incumbent upon you to really fight against complacency. There are people, your colleagues, people in the workforce that prefer to believe that it's going to be the same as it was before, and that's understandable. So please share this webinar with your network. You know, that quote from Lenin, you know, suddenly nothing happens and then suddenly everything happens, is really, really key. Don't forget that we have lots of resources available to help you, and there's the link to our free resources in our library. Please follow me on LinkedIn because I try and post articles that address these types of issues and challenges in a format that's really easy to digest. And please give us a call whenever you feel the challenges are overwhelming. So this is our 2017 webinar program. To give you the heads up, we've got, kicking off in January, we're talking about decision making under pressure. February, we move into changing GMP behaviors and quality culture. We then talk about how to stop making the same mistakes and improve, you know, how to drive down repeat errors and mistakes. Number 4, we're going to talk about in March, human error prevention once again, always a really key area that we have a lot of expertise and are able to help you in. We'll move on then to talk about effective self-inspections, best industry practice. We'll talk about the power of less and how to simplify your SOPs before moving then on to how to make your training programs far more effective by making the material stick. In other words, change behaviors. And we'll move towards the end of the year by talking about Leadership 2030, how we as leaders have to change the way we lead people. And then we'll move on to performing under pressure and an eye-watering subject right at the end of next year, conquering the chaos, how to thrive in an uncertain world. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen, for Resiliency, taking the hits. Please, please, immediately after this session, discuss these types of challenges with your friends and colleagues. The era of brutal disruption is here. They used to happen once every 10 years or so. They're going to happen once a year, once every 6 months. So our ability to take that punch that we didn't see coming, take it in the face, get up from the canvas stronger is going to be really, really key. So if you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to get back to me. You know, I always, answer these questions. Many of you contact me by phone, by email, and LinkedIn. I encourage you to do so. And thank you very much indeed, folks, for listening, and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.